Hey, my name is Marcus. I'm 30 years old, and I do technical documentation for a mid-sized manufacturing company called Aldrin Industrial, based out of Sutter Falls, Minnesota, a town of about 14,000 people in the flat, lake-scattered country west of the Twin Cities, where the winters come in like a verdict and the summers are so brief and golden that people treat them almost religiously, like they know the whole thing could be revoked at any moment. My job is writing the manuals. Every machine Aldrin makes, conveyor systems, automated packaging lines, industrial fastening equipment, gets a set of documentation that tells the person operating it exactly what it does, how to maintain it, how to troubleshoot it when something goes wrong. The work requires a specific kind of attention. You have to understand the machine well enough to explain it clearly to someone who has never seen it, using language that is precise without being technical in a way that loses the reader, specific without being overwhelming, organized so that the person who needs Step 7 can find Step 7 without reading Steps 1 through 6 first. Bad documentation gets people hurt. Good documentation disappears into the background, which is where it belongs. I work from home 3 days a week, from an apartment on the second floor of a building that used to be a bank, high ceilings, tall windows, original tile floor that is cold every morning from October through April, and that I have learned to account for. My desk faces one of the windows, which looks out over the park across the street. I can see the park benches from where I sit. I can see the people who use them, the lunch crowd on weekday afternoons, the older couple who walks the path every evening regardless of weather, the woman who brings her dog and always sits on the bench nearest the maple tree because the dog likes to dig at the roots. I know the park the way you know a thing you've looked at from the same angle for 2 years. Every regular, every change in the season, every unfamiliar face. That matters to this story. I keep odd hours because the nature of the work allows it. I'm up early, 5 or 5:30, but I work in long, uninterrupted stretches and stop when the work is done rather than when the clock says to. Some days I'm done by 2 in the afternoon and I take a long walk. Some days I'm still at the desk at 8 in the evening and I have to remind myself to eat. The work is quiet. Most of what I do is sit very still and think about how to say a thing precisely, and then say it, and then read it back and decide if I got it right, and usually I didn't get it exactly right the first time. I live alone. The apartment has 2 rooms and a kitchen and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that is the reason I chose it over the other 3 places I looked at, a fact my mother finds very funny and my older brother finds suspicious. I eat well. I like to cook, which surprises people who meet me because I am quiet in a way that reads as ascetic. But actually I just spend a lot of time inside my own head, and cooking is one of the things that gets me out of it. I make actual meals with components and timing. I eat them at the table, usually with something to read. I am not, in the most honest terms, lonely. But I have enough stillness in my life to know the difference between being alone and being at peace with it. And there are evenings when I'm not sure which one I'm in. The previous year had been a long one. My father had a health scare in the spring. His heart, caught early, managed now. But the 6 weeks before the diagnosis were the longest 6 weeks I've spent. My closest friend moved to Portland with his wife in August, and I was glad for him and felt the absence more than I'd expected. And there was a woman named Kara who I'd spent 4 months thinking something was becoming, and who had looked at me in October with genuine kindness and said she thought we were better as friends. And she was right. And knowing she was right didn't make the apartment any less quiet the evening after. None of these things broke me, but they accumulated. By the time November came, I had the particular tired feeling of a year that had asked a lot of me and hadn't given much of it back. The diary was on the bench on a Tuesday morning in early November, which was the first genuinely cold day of the season. That specific cold that arrives in Minnesota like an announcement, not a gradual thing, just the air changing overnight, and everything you touch in the morning carrying the news. I was taking a walk before settling into a long stretch of documentation work. I do this when I know the day ahead is going to require sustained concentration. I walk first to burn off whatever restlessness is in me, so that when I sit down, I'm actually still. It was about 8 in the morning. The park was mostly empty. A woman was running the far path with headphones on. A man was walking a retriever near the fountain. The bench by the maple tree was empty, which was not unusual at that hour. Except there was something on it. I almost didn't stop. I noticed it from 10 feet away, a small book, dark red cover, sitting on the bench like someone had set it down and stepped away for a moment and would be right back. I looked around. The runner was at the far end of the path. The man with the dog was heading toward the east gate. I stood at the bench for a moment. Then I sat down and picked it up. It was a journal. The cover was a plain dark burgundy, soft, the kind sold at stationery shops. No name on the outside. I opened to the first page. There was a name on the inside cover, written in blue ink in a small, neat hand, Alina. Below it, an address on Whitmore Street, 4 blocks from the park. I sat with it for a moment. The right thing was obvious. I would bring it to the address on Whitmore Street. Whatever was inside it was not mine to read. I closed it and stood up and started walking toward Whitmore Street. But I am a person who notices things, and as I closed the journal before the cover came fully shut, I saw the top of a page, a single line visible at the edge. Not read, not sought. Just there. He was at the park again today. The one who reads on the bench. I stopped walking. I stood on the path with the journal in my hand, and I thought about that for what was probably 30 seconds, and felt like longer. Then, I kept walking toward Whitmore Street. Because the right thing was still the right thing, regardless of what I may or may not have just read. The building on Whitmore Street was a pale brick 3-story with a row of mailboxes in the entryway. I found the name on the second mailbox from the left. E. Vasquez, 2B. I pressed the buzzer. After a moment, yes, a woman's voice, mid-30s, I guessed from it. Careful. My name is Marcus, I said. I found a journal in the park. There's an address written inside. This address. Silence for 3 seconds. Then the door buzzed open. She was waiting in the doorway of 2B when I came up the stairs. 35, I found out later. That morning she was just a woman in a gray sweater with her dark hair loose, and the particular expression of someone who has just realized something embarrassing and is deciding how to handle it. She was not quite tall. She had paint-stained fingers, not fresh paint, old, the kind that lives in the whorls of your fingerprints for days, and she was holding the door frame like she needed something to hold. That's mine, she said. I figured, I said. She looked at the journal in my hand. Did you read it? She said. I thought about the line at the top of the page, the one I hadn't sought, the one I also hadn't forgotten. No, I said. There was a name and address on the first page. That's all I saw. She looked at me with the expression of someone doing a calculation. Thank you, she said, for bringing it back. Of course. I held it out. She took it. We stood in the hallway for a moment. She was looking at the journal in her hands. I was aware that I should say goodbye and go. Are you the one who reads on the bench? She asked. Without looking up. My throat tightened slightly. By the maple, I said. Yeah, she nodded, still looking at the journal. I work across the street, she said. I've seen you from the window. I live across the street, I said. I've seen you from mine. She looked up then. Something moved across her face that was not quite what I expected. Not embarrassment exactly, more like recognition, like two people arriving at the same doorway from different directions, and both being slightly surprised. I'm Alina, she said. I know, I said. From the journal. She smiled. Brief and involuntary and gone quickly, but there. Goodbye, Marcus, she said. Goodbye, I said. I went back down the stairs and out into the November cold and walked to the park and sat on the bench by the maple for probably 20 minutes doing no reading at all. I did not go back to Whitmore Street. I thought about it and decided against it and told myself that was the right call, and I mostly believed myself. But I am a person who notices things, and I began to notice new things. The second-floor window of the building across the street from mine, the one with the slightly wider sill, the one that always had the lamp on by 3 in the afternoon in November, that window was hers. I had noticed the lamp before without knowing whose it was. I noticed it differently now. I noticed her in the park twice in the following week. Once on a Thursday afternoon, sitting on a different bench with a sketchbook open on her knee, drawing something I couldn't see from the path. Once on a Saturday morning, walking with her hands in her coat pockets and her head slightly down in the way of someone thinking something through. Both times I was near enough to acknowledge her, and both times I didn't, because I couldn't tell whether she wanted to be acknowledged or whether she'd come to the park to be alone with whatever she was working on. On the second Saturday, I almost stopped. She looked up at the last moment, and we made the kind of eye contact that is too long to be accidental and too brief to be a decision, and then both of us kept walking. In the apartment that evening, I sat at my desk without working for a while, which is unusual for me. My desk faced the window. The lamp across the street was on. I opened a new document and stared at it. I thought about the line I had not read, the one I hadn't sought. He was at the park again today. The one who reads on the bench. I thought about what it meant that the journal had been left on the bench by the maple tree. I thought about how it had been sitting there, in the open, without a bag or a coat or any other sign that someone had stepped away and was coming back. Just the journal. On the bench. On a cold Tuesday morning. I am someone who thinks carefully about whether the thing in front of him is what it appears to be. The machine documentation teaches you that. You look at what a system is actually doing, not what you were told it would do, not what the previous manual said, but what it is actually doing right now in front of you, and you write that down as accurately as you can. I thought about that for a while. There is a coffee shop on the ground floor of her building. I had been in it before, 6 times. On the Monday after the second Saturday, I went in the morning and ordered coffee and sat at the table nearest the window. I had a manuscript draft on my laptop that genuinely needed work. I was not manufacturing an excuse to be there. She came in at 9:15. She saw me immediately. The shop was small, 7 tables, and I was at the one nearest the door. She stopped for just a moment, then came to the counter and ordered, and when she turned with her coffee, she looked at the table I was at and at the empty chair across from me. "Is this?" she started. "Please," I said. She sat down. She had the sketchbook with her and a canvas bag with papers sticking out of it. She was dressed for work, cleaner than the paint-stained version I'd met at the door, but with a small streak of something blue near her left wrist that she probably hadn't noticed. "You work here?" she said, nodding at my laptop. "Sometimes you? I have a studio upstairs. 2nd floor. She looked at the window. "I illustrate. Children's books, mostly, some editorial work." "The paint," I said. She looked at her hands. Occupational. I write manuals, I said. Technical documentation. Nobody can tell just by looking at me, which is probably appropriate. She looked at me with something that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. What kind of manuals? She said. I told her. The manufacturing equipment. The layered logic of it. Making something complicated legible to someone who's never seen it. Organizing information so that the person who needs step 7 doesn't have to wade through everything before it. She listened in the way that some people listen, which is with actual attention rather than just patience. That's what I do, she said. In a different register. A picture book has maybe 800 words. Every word has to be exactly right, and the pictures have to carry what the words don't say. She looked at her coffee. The gap between what the words say and what the pictures say is where the story actually lives. I thought about the journal, about the line I hadn't read. Can I ask you something? I said. You can try. The journal, was it left by accident? She held her coffee cup with both hands and looked at the window. That's a complicated question, she said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been trying to be braver about things. My therapist calls it low-stakes exposure, doing a slightly frightening thing in a context where the worst case is embarrassing, but not devastating. She looked at me. She did not specifically suggest leaving a journal on a park bench. But I thought about it for 2 weeks, and then one morning I set it down. And then I walked away very fast and went back to my apartment and spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it. She looked at the table. And then you showed up at my door. I looked at her. How much is in it? I said, about the man on the bench. She looked at the window again. Enough, she said. How long? Since July. She said it to the window. Which I realize is a great deal of information to be delivering to someone I've spoken to for a total of approximately 12 minutes. 14, I said. She looked at me. I've been watching you too, I said. Not the journal. Just, you come to the park to think. You draw in a sketchbook and you get frustrated with it and flip back several pages and then forward again. On Thursday afternoons you go to the park instead of eating lunch. You walk differently when you're working something out than when you're just walking. She was very still. You noticed all of that from across the street, she said. I told you. I document things. She looked at me for a long time. That should be strange, she said. That it isn't strange. What does that mean? I think it means we've been having a conversation for a while, I said. Without a vocabulary. She looked at the sketchbook on the table. She opened it to a page I couldn't see from my angle. She turned it around and slid it across to me. It was a drawing of a figure on a park bench, rendered in pencil with the particular quality of someone who draws very well and knows it, and also thinks drawing well is just a tool, not a performance. The figure was reading. The maple tree was behind the bench, done in a few economical lines that caught the shape of it exactly. It was unmistakably the bench by the maple. It was unmistakably me, though I couldn't have said how. There was no face, just posture, and the angle of the head, and the specific way the figure held the book slightly tilted. I looked at it for a while. July, I said. July, she said. I turned the sketchbook back to her. You're very good, I said. I know, she said. Not arrogant, just accurate, in the way she seemed to be accurate about most things. Elena, I said. Yes, can I take you to dinner? She looked at me. For a moment her face had the expression of someone doing the calculation again, the same one from the apartment doorway, weighing something quickly and precisely. Yes, she said. I think that's the right next step. Dinner was on a Wednesday at a restaurant called Oren's on the north side of town, the kind of place with good light and no noise, where the tables are far enough apart that you can actually hear the person across from you. She came in a dark coat and sat down and looked at the menu, and then set it aside and looked at me, which told me she'd probably already looked up the menu online and made her decision, which I was already beginning to understand was simply how she operated. There was a woman at the table nearest us, mid-60s, gray hair, eating alone with a book propped against the water glass in the unself-conscious way of someone who has been eating alone with books for decades and found the arrangement superior. She caught my eye at one point and looked between me and Elena with a particular approving expression of someone who has watched a great many people be awkward about the beginning of something and finds this particular instance hopeful. I looked away before Elena noticed. She told me about the illustration work, about what it was like to sit with a manuscript and ask what the words weren't saying, and then find the image that said it. She had a particular philosophy about children's picture books that I found myself listening to very carefully, that children are not sentimental readers. They are ruthless. They will look at a picture and know immediately whether it is true or whether it is decorating. The illustration had to be true in a way that matched the text without repeating it, and that gap between what the text said and what the picture showed was where the child reader lived. "The gap," I said. "The gap," she said. I told her about my father's heart scare in the spring, about the 6 weeks before the diagnosis, the particular quality of that waiting. She listened without rushing to comfort, which I noticed and appreciated. She told me about her own year, a long book project that had fallen through when the publisher folded, 8 months of work that ended in a form letter. A sister in California she wasn't speaking to, for reasons she described briefly and without drama, and then set aside. An apartment she'd moved into after a relationship ended 18 months ago. Still not quite hers feeling. Still with boxes in one corner she hadn't found a place for. "What's in the boxes?" I asked. She thought about it. "A lamp that doesn't work in any room I've tried it in. Some books I keep meaning to read. A painting I did during a period I don't want to think about too hard." She looked at her wine glass. "Things I'm not ready to throw away and not ready to put up." "That's a very specific kind of box," I said. "Is it?" "The kind you carry because you're not sure what it means to leave it behind." She looked at me. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." There was a quiet that settled between us then, not the uncomfortable kind, the other kind. The kind that feels like something being decided. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." The journal. She turned the wine glass in her hand. "I wrote in it for 4 months. About you. And what I wrote was, it started as observation, the way you moved, the way you read, how you sat in different weather. I'm an illustrator. I observe things. That's the cover story I told myself." She looked up. But at some point, it became something else. Something I was writing because I needed to put it somewhere, and I didn't know where else to put it. I looked at her. "What did you need to put somewhere?" She breathed in once, deliberately. That I had been watching a stranger across a park for 4 months, and the way he moved in the world made me feel less alone. And that felt enormous and also completely absurd, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I wrote it down. She looked at the table. And then one morning I set the journal on the bench. And then you showed up at my door. The restaurant was warm around us. The other tables were their own separate worlds. "I want to say something back," I said. She waited. "I brought the journal to your door because it was the right thing to do, and I told you I hadn't read it," which was true. I hadn't read it. I looked at her. But there was a line, at the edge of a page, when I was closing it. I didn't seek it out. It was just there. She went still. "What line?" she said. Quietly, "He was at the park again today. The one who reads on the bench." She held very still for a moment. "I've been thinking about that line since Tuesday morning," I said. "I've been thinking about what it meant that the journal was on the bench and not in a bag. I've been thinking about the drawing in the sketchbook. I've been thinking about the lamp in your window at 3 in the afternoon." I looked at her. "I notice things. That's what I do. And what I've been noticing, for longer than I knew it was noticing, is you." She looked at me steadily. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah, I'm going to need you to not be mysterious about this," she said. "I've been brave enough for one season. I need you to be clear. I want to know you," I said. "Fully. The boxes in the corner, and the painting you don't want to think about, and the sister in California, and the sketchbook and all of it. I want to know what you write when you think no one will read it." She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "That's very clear," she said. "I mean it to be." She reached across the table and touched the back of my hand briefly, not holding it, just a touch. The kind that is a statement. "Then let's do that," she said. The Friday we'd planned became a walk along the river path, which in November in Minnesota requires commitment, a willingness to be genuinely cold for the sake of the thing you're doing, which tells you something true about a person. She showed up in a hat and a coat that looked like it had been good for a long time and still was, and we walked at the same pace, which is not always a given. We talked about her sister in California, the silence between them, how it had started over something small and grown because neither of them had said the right thing at the right time, and then too much time had passed, and the gap had become its own geography. She said she was trying to write a letter, that she'd started it 6 times, that the drafting was harder than any illustration, because there was no gap between words and pictures to hide in, just words, just her, just what she actually meant. "You'll get it right," I said. "You don't know that." "I know you get things right eventually," I said. "I've seen the sketchbook." She looked at me sideways. "That's different," she said. "The process isn't." She was quiet, looking at the river, dark and quick, the bare trees on the far bank, the path empty except for us. "My therapist says the hardest letters are the ones where you know what you should say but you're still afraid of what it costs," she said. Which is true. But knowing it's true doesn't make the letter easier. It just makes the not writing harder to justify. "Send the version you have," I said. "A good draft sent is worth more than a perfect draft that isn't." She stopped walking. I stopped beside her. She looked at me with part amusement and part something sharper. "Did you just give me documentation writing advice about my estranged sister?" she said. "Yes." She looked at the river for a moment. "That's actually useful," she said. "I resent that." "I know," I said. She started walking again. After a moment, she reached out and put her hand through my arm, not a gesture exactly, just contact, and we walked like that the rest of the way. The woman in her 60s from Orense, I found out later her name was Ruth, a retired librarian who had lived in the building on Whitmore Street for 20 years and who knew Alana's mother and had, apparently, been quietly invested in this situation from the beginning, passed us on the path going the other direction, walking her terrier, and gave me a look of such pointed satisfaction that I had to look away to keep my composure. She said nothing. She didn't have to. I am not going to tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't. Elena is a complicated person in the specific way that people who have been alone with their own interior for a long time become complicated. She has strong opinions, and most of them are correct, which is its own kind of challenge to be around, and she can go very quiet when something is wrong in a way that requires patience and specific questions rather than general checking in. There were 2 weeks in January when we hit something I don't have a clean word for. Not a fight exactly. More like two systems coming into contact and finding out where they didn't fit yet, and the discomfort of that. I am not a person who likes unresolved things. She is not a person who rushes resolution. We found our way through it, but not quickly. What I want to tell you instead is the Wednesday in February when I went to her studio for the first time. She'd been working on a new book, a manuscript she'd fallen in love with, a story about a child who can't hear but who understands the world through what she sees, and the particular way she experiences silence as something full rather than empty. Alina had been living inside it for 2 months by then, and it showed in the way she talked about it, with the quality of someone who has found the exact right problem to solve and knows it. The studio was the second floor of the building on Whitmore Street, a long room with north-facing windows and good light, and the smell of linseed oil and paper. The walls had reference images pinned to them, photos, color swatches, her own preliminary sketches in various stages. There were flat files along one wall and a drafting table in the center, and a smaller worktable covered in watercolor work in progress. She walked me through the book, page by page, the dummies laid out in sequence, the text alongside the images. She talked me through every decision, why this image faced left instead of right, why the color in the fifth spread was cooler, what the shape of the silence looked like in a picture versus what it felt like. She talked about the gap between what the text said and what the pictures said, and how the meaning lived in between. I listened to her the way I listen when something is important, without interrupting, without offering, just receiving. At the end, she looked at me. "Well?" she said. "The spread on page 14, I said. "What about it?" "The child's face. She's not looking at anyone. She's looking at the light coming through the window." I looked at the image. "That's the whole book right there. That's the thing the text can't say." Elena looked at me for a long moment, something in her face that was softer than most of what she showed. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." I looked at the spread. The light through the window. The child looking at it. "I've been trying to write a sentence for a week," I said, "for a section in a conveyor manual. The section that explains what the system does when a component fails unexpectedly, the automatic response, the way the machine compensates before the operator even knows something has changed." I looked at her. I couldn't find the right words. And just now I understood why. The sentence isn't about the mechanism. It's about what it means that the machine keeps going, that the gap gets closed before anyone has to ask. She looked at me. "Write it down," she said, "before you lose it." I wrote it down in my phone, standing in the middle of her studio. She watched me do it with an expression I had not seen from her before, tender, slightly amused, entirely present. "We both spend all day looking for the exact right way to say something," she said. "Yeah," I said. "That's probably not a coincidence." "No," I said. "Probably not." The book came out in October. I was there when the advance copy arrived. A Tuesday morning. Courier at her door. Her opening the envelope at the kitchen table in my apartment, where she'd been working since she said the light in her studio in the mornings had gotten too bright and mine was better, which I think was not entirely about the light. She held the book for a while without opening it. Then she opened it slowly, the way you open something you've been waiting for long enough that the arrival is its own experience. I made coffee while she read through it. When she was done, she set it on the table and looked at it. She looked at me. "It's right," she said. "It's exactly what I meant." "I know," I said. "How do you know?" because you wouldn't be that quiet if it wasn't. She looked at the book, and then at me, and the look had everything in it. The boxes in the corner of her apartment are gone now. The lamp found a place. It's on the windowsill of her studio, casting the kind of light that's too warm for work and exactly right for everything else. The painting from the period she didn't want to think about too hard is hung in the hallway, which was her decision and which she made one afternoon without announcing it, and when I saw it I said it was good, and she said, I know. That's why I was afraid of it. The Sister in California. That's still in progress, a long, careful work. Not done, but not abandoned. My desk still faces the window that looks out over the park. The bench by the maple is still there. On mornings when the weather is right, the brief golden mornings that Minnesota gives you like a gift you didn't earn, I go and sit on it with a book, the way I always have. The difference is that sometimes she is in the window across the street, in the apartment that is partly hers now and partly mine, at the desk with the north light. And she looks up when I look up, and we stay like that for a moment before going back to our work. I spend my days finding the exact right words for complicated things. I have spent the better part of a year trying to find the right words for this one. The closest I've come is this. There is a kind of attention that looks like stillness, that most people mistake for distance. And there is a kind of courage that looks like carelessness, a journal left on a bench, a sketchbook turned around across a coffee shop table, a buzzer answered for a stranger at the door. And sometimes those two things find each other across a park, across 2 years of early mornings and north-facing windows, and what happens between them is not a story you could have written in advance. It's more like documentation, like finding the words after the fact for something that was already true. I found her diary on a bench. Every page was about me. I brought it back to her door, because that was the right thing to do. And that was also, as it turned out, the beginning of everything.